In terms of chronology, this lesson occurs before our prior lesson on the covenant of circumcision. Abram had just won a victory over 4 kings. He was recognized by even the pagan king of Sodom. So he should have been riding high, but the Lord starts this conversation saying to him, "Do not fear, Abram. I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great," letting Abram know the source of his protection and strength. But Abram's success did not overshadow the hopelessness he had over the fact that he had no successor. Even as the Lord is assuring him that he will have great rewards, Abram's response is, "What good is that to me? You, Lord, have not given me an heir to pass on my rewards to." At this point, we need to understand ancient tradition. In ancient tradition, if a man did not have a son, the childless couple would adopt one of the servants born into their household as a son. Abram had adopted Eliezer of Damascus. This son would care for them when they were older and would inherit their possessions and property at the time of their death. At this low point in Abram's faith, for he had no son of his own body, this was the best option that he could hope for. God, however, is without limits, so he could promise Abram more than Abram could provide himself. The Lord tells Abram that Eliezer is not the God-given heir, that Abram would have a son of his own body. To reassure Abram, God took him outside and drew his attention to the stars and says to him, "This is how numerous your offspring will be." Abram was once a man with hopes fading, but now he responds to this divine revelation that he believes in the Lord and that through his loyalty he has been blessed. Abram's faith was personal. Abram believed in the Lord. He did not merely believe about God, but in God. Second, Abram's faith was propositional faith. While Abram believed in the person of God, his faith was based upon the promises of God. And third, Abram's faith was related to a very practical sense of need. He needed a son, an heir, to carry on his lineage. For modern Christians, our faith must not underestimate God. We must continue to hope even when there is no evidence upon which to base our hopes. God is not restricted by our imagination, not restricted by our notion of biology or science, not restricted by our lifespan or law. In addition to descendants, God gave Abram land, but this land was already occupied. It was already the home of other people. This is the basis of wars that still rage. But if we accept the fact that the earth is the Lord's and all that is within it, God owned the land of Canaan and he could transfer it to those people willing to live according to his word. So what we're seeing in the next part of our lesson is in actuality an ancient transfer of ownership. In the ancient world of Abraham, binding agreements weren't written down by lawyers on deeds signed by the parties involved. Instead, the two parties would arrive at a mutually acceptable agreement, and then they would formalize it in the form of a covenant. The covenant was sealed by dividing an animal, and the animal was cut in half, and the parties would pass between the halves. This symbolized the serious nature of the covenant. This covenant is distinctive because only God, in the appearance of smoke over a flaming torch, passed between the divided carcasses of animals. This was done to signify that the covenant was unilateral, only one-sided, unconditional. No conditions were placed on Abram for its fulfillment. He required nothing of Abram. God was going to bless him without him doing anything. Abram's faith grew out of his personal childless plight, and God promised him a son. His faith is strengthened by a specific revelation concerning his son and the soil his offspring would inherit. As modern Christians, we often learn more and grow closer to God during our times of trial, when we have times of want and need more than we have times of victory and triumph. By God's blessings, Abram was successful. He had won victories in battle that he otherwise could not have won, but it was his yearning for a son that brought him closer to God. For Abram and modern Christians, we must realize that faith cannot be separated from suffering, for God uses this to draw men to an intimate fellowship with him. Faith is seldom strengthened by our success, but by believing in God in the midst of delays and difficulties. That's the lesson for this week. Have a great week. Bye.